Friday Forum, Oregon's premier public affairs forum. I'm Jim Zarin, president of City Club, and I welcome you all, those of you here at the Governor Hotel, and those of you listening on OPB or KBPS radio or watching on cable television. Thank you for joining us at City Club's first Friday Forum of the year on the 9th of January 2009. Today we'll hear from Oregon State Government's economist who will discuss Oregon's financial situation and describe what we might expect from the state's economy in the coming year. Before we begin our program, however, I have a few announcements. First, in consideration of those of you, those sitting close to you and our radio and television audiences, for any of you who have not already, please turn off your cell phones and any other device that will make noise. We are pleased to welcome today 4 new Friday Forum corporate sponsors, without whose generous financial support these time-honored City Club Friday Forums would not be possible. Our 4 new corporate sponsors for this quarter are Girding Eadlin Development Company, Pacific Power, The Standard, and UBS. We thank them all for their support. And we are especially pleased to welcome our sponsor, The Standard. A whole table of representatives are here with us today, so if the Standard folks, wherever you are, could stand and be recognized, we'd like you to do that. Thank you. Now, one of the City Club's program committees, Agora, is hosting 4 events this month. These include, first, a discussion regarding human trafficking. Second, an event addressing the role of media in our local community. Third, a presentation regarding design plans for the new bridge to span the Willamette River. And fourth, January, we'll welcome back our book club, Citizens Read. And I want to mention in this regard, the book to be discussed is Kafka Comes to America, and I'm told we have books for sale in the back of the room at a discount. The lady selling them is waving her hand, so if you want to participate or otherwise want to get this book at a discount, it can be purchased in the back of the room after our program. For more about these and other City Club events, please go to the City Club website or call the City Club's staff. Now, the new year also heralds an informative round of Friday Forums, this being the first. On January 16th, City Club welcomes a panel of experts who will discuss innovative solutions to budget crises that governments have faced both at home and abroad. On January 23rd, Willamette University President Lee Pelton will address the intersection and significance of race and politics in today's America. Closing out the month, Multnomah County Chair Ted Wheeler will present his State of the County address on January 30th. Now, I also want to note that our scheduled final 2008 forum with Stand for Children President Jonah Edelman, which was canceled due to the snowstorm that week, has been rescheduled for February 20th. We hope you can join us for all of these City Club Friday Forums that are coming up. And now to our program. You certainly don't need me to tell you that our nation is facing a financial crisis unprecedented in magnitude since the Great Depression of the 1930s. And like most states, Oregon faces numerous and severe challenges due to this crisis, including escalating unemployment, falling government revenues, and increasing demands for public services. Yet, this also is a time of change. A new president committed to aggressive federal intervention in the economy, who has wide public support and shares power with a Congress controlled by his own party, will take office in just 11 days. By all accounts, President-elect Obama already is leading the formulation of federal economic policy in a way no incoming president ever has. And here in Oregon, a legislature comprised of a House and Senate controlled by the governor's political party will convene its 2000 session just next Monday, January 12th. And there are reports of plans for early legislation for unprecedented levels of bonding of state public work spending to help jumpstart this state's economy. But there also are rumors of a pending state budget deficit much worse than has been publicly projected to date. So what really is the outlook for Oregon's economy during the next year? As best we can tell, as of right now, in early to mid-January. Who better to address this question than Oregon State economist, who we are fortunate to have with us as our speaker today. Our guest's formal title is Director of the Oregon Office of Economic Analysis. In that capacity, he is responsible for generating the state executive branch's economic and demographic forecasts and for estimating Oregon's general fund revenues. These predictions he is responsible for making are used to develop the governor's budget and thus substantially impact the legislature's state spending decisions. Our speaker received his Ph.D. in economics at the University of Colorado, where he taught briefly before moving to Portland State in 1983. At PSU, he was chair of the economics department and co-director of the Applied Economics Research Group. In 1992, he accompanied a team to Poland and Hungary to help establish educational programs and foster ties between local universities and business communities in those new free market economies. After serving as a member of the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors for 3 years, he was appointed as Oregon State economist in 1999. He served in that post through 2006, at which time he returned to PSU to teach, but in 2008, he once again returned to his present position as state economist. He likes to keep busy as a member of several economic associations, and though he doesn't have much time right now, occasionally serves as a consultant. Now, on a personal note, excuse me, our speaker tells us that he first became interested in economic forecasting at the age of 10, when during an economic downturn, he lost 3 of his 5 customers of his lawn mowing business. He also indicates that to engage in activity less dangerous than economic forecasting, he turns to whitewater kayaking. And then finally, he says, if all else fails, he has at his disposal his personal wine cellar comprised of over 700 bottles of wine, and he indicated that that made the recent snowstorm no trouble at all for him. So, to discuss Oregon's 2009 economic forecast, please help me welcome our state's economist, Dr. Tom Potiowsky. Tom.
All right, thank you, Jim. Is anyone here from Seattle? You know, I'd imagine, the way that Seattle sort of portrays itself, I was imagining a headline in the Seattle Times saying something like, all roads down to Seattle, Pacific Northwest isolated, you know? But thank goodness we're here in Portland. We don't take such a centric view of things. And I really want to thank the City Club for inviting me back again. I also definitely want to thank Portland State University, the best university in the state, for allowing me the opportunity to pursue my public service here in the job as state economist. Now, you have a long history here of providing a public forum for topics of interest to Oregonians, and definitely the economy fits that aspect of a topic of very great interest. Now, before I start, I want to clear up one misconception about the forecast that's produced by my office, the Office of Economic Analysis. Here is a frequent perception that I hear all the time. If the forecasts keep getting worse, why don't you make your current forecasts worse than what it is? Or another way of saying this, since you know the economy is getting worse, why wait until it happens before you change your forecast? Well, first, the premise that I know the economy is getting worse is false. If I knew the economy was getting worse, it would be in the forecast. Now, given that the economy has gotten worse, do I wish I had it in my earlier forecasts? Yes, I do. So, I'm about to tell you about the Oregon economy. Our official forecast release is going to come sometime in mid-February. Please do not ask me today what that forecast will be. Will it be different than what I tell you today? By a degree, yes. Do I know what it will be today? No. You will have to wait until mid-February, just like me. When I know, I'll let you know. All right? So with that, what I'm going to tell you today probably will be a little different than what we released back in February because this economy is changing so rapidly. We have not seen this sort of rapid change really in, I would say, at least the post-World War II period. Now, I was looking through my notes from my last address to the City Club. I stated at the beginning of 2008 it was going to be a very rough year for Oregon, but no recession. Now, good forecasters generally destroy all evidence of past forecasts. Honest forecasters looked to see whether the tea leaves at the time were giving accurate signals about the direction of the economy. Now, the direction of the economy and the timing of events were fairly close to how things actually unfolded for 2008. The difference is that the depth and speed to which we fell into recession was largely unanticipated. Of course, for those that use hindsight as their main forecasting tool, they knew this was happening all the time. Actually, the number of told you so people are much larger today than they were a year ago. Now, let's take a quick look at how fast this ship is sinking. The U.S. December unemployment numbers were released today, and we've had the second consecutive month of more than 500,000 jobs lost. The unemployment rate now stands at 7.2% for the U.S. That's the highest since January of 1993. With 2.6 million job losses, 2008 is the highest yearly job loss total since 1945. 1.9 million of these job losses occurred between September and December. That's 73% of the total job losses in 2008 happened in the last 4 months of last year. So very rapid changes were occurring. Now, back in July of 2008, the greatest risk facing the U.S. economy was inflation. Now, that's yesterday's news now. Now we're worried about deflation today. And who would have guessed that a barrel of oil would have cost around $40 today as opposed to last summer when it was over $140? So unusual, very rapid, in my mind, very difficult to anticipate changes in our U.S. economy. Now, the good news with falling energy prices is that the drop in these energy prices is comparable to about a $250 billion tax cut for consumers. It's like, really? I know when I go to the gas station, rather than paying $60 to fill my tank, I'm filling it for under $30. And that's money, in a sense, back in my pocket, like a tax break. You know, at the time, this has not really, though, spurred sales of cars or light trucks in our economy. Now, no one asked me, but I was recommending that instead of bailing out the 3 major car manufacturers, we should let them merge into one firm to be able to compete in the world. We could call them American Motors. You know, the name's available now. But I was afraid that given their track record, we might see reintroductions of the Pacer and the Javelin and the Kremlin, so probably wouldn't be a good idea. So basically, here's the scenario. We entered 2008 in the U.S. with a mounting housing problem. Industries associated with housing, construction, financial, retail areas, wood products, house building products, all suffered greatly because of the housing collapse. Then the subprime mortgage market no longer was contained in the housing market. It spilled into the total financial system, and that's pushing us into a very deep recession. And we're not alone. Forecasters see the global economy as having the first drop in overall GDP measures for the global economy in 2009, and that'll be the first drop since the 1930s. Now, that's the sort of backdrop that we have for the U.S. economy. And then we're looking at Oregon. How are we positioned in this situation now that we know the U.S. very rapidly at the end of 2008 falling deeper into recession? Well, we've got a very similar picture here in Oregon, and it's definitely sweeping across our economy. At the start of 2008, the housing crash was impacting Oregon, just as the rest of the nation. But our drop in housing prices was not as severe, and our oversupply of homes in the market was much less than what I call other desirable places to live. We also ranked very low on our number of delinquent mortgages. And if the downturn would have stayed concentrated in the housing market, Oregon would have fared much better through this recession compared to other states. But like the U.S., we hit the same wall towards the end of last year. As recently of June of 2008, the unemployment rate in Oregon was 5.5%. As of November, the rate now stands at 8.1%. December Oregon employment numbers will be released in about 10 days, and undoubtedly, I think that rate's going to go up again. Now, through November, we've lost around 35,000 jobs. We're about 2% down from our peak of February of last year. But over 60% of those job losses happened in the last 3 months that we have data. So it's just like the U.S. situation, all of a sudden, when that financial crisis hit us, it spread across to all markets, and we're seeing a very rapid drop into what might have been somewhat of a normal recession into a much deeper one. Now, Oregon can be characterized as a manufacturing state. We make things here. Our economy is definitely more diversified compared to our heavy reliance on natural resources back in the 1970s. So our manufacturing base now is spread across more industries. But taken as a whole, we still are basically a manufacturing-based economy. So as this recession now is becoming deeper and more widely spread across all our industries, Oregon tends to feel the negative forces worse than most other states. So Oregon has rapidly moved now from a mild recession position to one that is quite severe. For comparison purposes, the unemployment rate reached in the last recession was 8.5%, and during the 81-82 recession, Oregon hit a high of 12.1% in November of 1982. Now, I've already told you that November of 2008, our unemployment rate stands at 8.1%. And before this recession is over, we could easily reach above 10% unemployment here. So this is shaping up to be a recession that is the deepest recession since post-World War II period. So what are we looking now going forward for the Oregon economy? Housing is adjusting rapidly. Permit data is down over 50%. Similar to what we saw just after the World War II years. Housing prices are declining around 10%. Some areas are less, some areas like Bend, more. If this recession remained in the housing market, I believe Oregon housing prices would not decline more than 12 to say 15% as this recession works itself out. And so rather than falling like Arizona, California, Nevada, which are seeing about 30% drops in prices, I think ours would have been much more milder. But possibly all bets are off. Our housing market is going to be hit by the broad-based recession. So prices could fall by more, not because we have too many subprime mortgages or we had too much overbuilding, but because the deepening recession is reducing demand for those homes and thus causing supply to rise relative to demand. Unfortunately, our housing crisis may resemble the housing markets of Ohio and Michigan rather than those of California and Arizona. The general outlook is for job losses in Oregon through the third quarter of this year, and then basically some bottom fishing, and no real upturn until probably we get to mid-2010. You know, there's a difference between what we call a bottoming out. You don't necessarily feel good at the bottom, but once you start to see getting out of that bottom, it's not going to really be till 2010 until we have that happen. Now, that's just a broad aspect of what we think. Recession is here. It's going to be very deep. Our worst quarter was either going to be this quarter or last quarter. We'll still have job losses through the third quarter of this year, and then a very mild bounce back, and not really seeing some increases in jobs till we get into into 2010. Now, why do I think the recession will end? History's on my side, for one. A common thread of all recessions is that they all come to an end. But is this time different? You know, they're just like snowflakes. No two recessions are alike. And this one definitely is a financial-based one. Well, a study done by the National Bureau of Economic Research, economists Reinhardt and Rogoff, they look at 5 major financial crises of the 18 crises that occurred around the world to developing economies. And these are since World War II. Now, they looked at Spain in 1977, Norway in 87, Finland in 91, Sweden in 91, and Japan in 92, when supposedly their financial crisis started. Now, the bottom line of this study is that the U.S. financial crisis is following a similar pattern. And I think the other thing to point out is this, although this seems very unique for us, and we really haven't seen this possible size of financial crisis since the Great Depression, this is not an unusual instance or circumstance that has not occurred around the world. We have seen financial crises in modern times. Now, the length of this recession is now in its 13th month, and if it continues on and ends somewhere in mid-2009, that'll sort of fit the pattern of these other financial crises that we've seen around the world. But going for us, we have rescue packages that are out there. We had early implementation of these rescue packages, unlike Japan that waited several years to start their rescue packages. And this, I think, holds out hope for us that a turnaround should come this year. Note, and as I said, hitting bottom doesn't necessarily feel good. The feel-good part's going to have to wait till 2010. Now, another part that has been pointed out to me, Bill Connerly, economist here in the Pacific Northwest, he said he's noticed in the data there's a little bit of a twist to this recession. Generally, in recessions, incomes fall by more than consumer expenditures. As people lose jobs, they lose their income, but they can go for past savings. There's other ways that they can still start to spend so that their consumption doesn't fall as much as what incomes fall. Well, and Oregon really knew this, right, back in the last recession when we had tremendous drops in our personal income and corporate income taxes. Now, this time around, we're seeing the opposite occurring. States like Washington and other heavily dependent sales tax states are seeing a very serious budget situation, much more serious than what ours is happening right now. So, and also in the last few months, we've seen an uptick in inflation-adjusted disposable personal income. So there actually tends to be some spending capability out there. It's just that households are not spending. You know, we kept telling them during the last boom time, don't spend so much, you need to save. And when did they finally get the message? Today. Now they decided it's time to save when this is the time we need them to spend. So what we're looking at is we just need to have these households have that confidence that they're not going to be losing their jobs, the economy is going to go forward, and we also need to have our lending institutions to stop hoarding the cash that's being infused to them. And I have great confidence in greed. I think banks will not sit on the money that they're getting forever. No one pays the bank interest to hold money, right? They have to make loans. And I'm convinced they will eventually start to loosen up and we'll see this credit freeze thawing even more than it has just slightly so far. Now, here we are in the situation, very much like the federal government. We find ourselves in the state of Oregon where we have tax revenues are falling because of the recession. The demand on services is rising at the same time, and we get into budget deficits. Now, unlike the federal government, we can't put together these kind of rescue packages where we give broad-based tax cuts, we increase spending tremendously, and we increase our deficit and then deficit finance by issuing bonds to borrow from the public to finance it. We are required as a state by our Constitution to balance the budget. Like it or not, we are forced basically into a situation where we have to be what we call pro-cyclical to the recession. We actually have to undertake measures that are opposite of what we see governments around the world doing today. We essentially have to cut spending or increase taxes, some combination of the two. So, but what can we do? Well, we're trying to do a few things. As you noticed, the governor came out with his budget in the beginning of December. And what things we can do is we can borrow for capital projects. Now, that means projects especially for the highway area, fixing up further the roads and bridges. We can do deferred maintenance, especially at our universities. If you've been around to our universities, you know that's a huge problem with the infrastructure, and that really needs a great deal of help. And we still, though, we can't bond enough to do all these projects. We actually have to do some raising of fees to finance some of these things, besides the borrowing plan to do, possibly raising some gas taxes. In my mind, this is one of the better times to do it, given that the price of gas has come down. It's much easier, I think, to do it in this environment than when gas was at, $4 a gallon. And then registration fees may also go up. The other thing we can do is talk to the Obama administration. In my mind, the states taken collectively are in more of a dire need and importance than our car manufacturers are. And I would definitely say we're more deserving than CEOs on Wall Street. One last thing that we can do, and that is, this is another lesson to us that we need to have very prudent spending and be able to forecast and know what the spending we're doing, and to see what sort of programs we have that can actually have a life of their own, and are the revenues going to grow enough to meet those programs that will continue to grow in the future. And we also need to re-look at our rainy day funds. We are in a much better situation through the governor and the past legislative session. We have set up both the Education Stability Fund and now a true rainy day fund. And we made a down payment in that rainy day fund with keeping the corporate kicker from the last biennium. That is around $700 million. We are looking at a budget problem at the moment of about $1.2 billion for the new biennium, which will start July 1st of this year. We are at a $142 million hole projected at the moment. I can tell you that we will most likely be projecting a larger hole because of how rapidly things have deteriorated in the economy. So the rainy day fund is not enough, but it is definitely a position that we're in better situation than we were before. And I think with the stimulus package that will come out of the Obama administration, hopefully it will come out sooner than later. It will be geared towards projects that need immediate attendance. You know, I don't think we should be putting in and asking for funds for the I-5 crossing of the Columbia River. And by the time we get around to that, it's going to be 2015, not 2009 when we need it. And also, the package will probably have some help on the Medicaid situation, so that will be provided more state block grants to help the people that are in need of those social services. Because like it or not, in economics, we know about trade-offs. And when you're in a situation with a decreasing size of the pie of the budget, there are generally all losers, but some groups lose more than others. And you have to make these very difficult trade-offs. So what I'd like to end with is to say we in Oregon are going to have a very tough time coming up, but we're also, I believe, better positioned in the future. You know, whether you like it or not, or how your political views are about the green movement, we are the center for the green movement in the U.S. And it is an aspect I don't believe is going to go away. Even if you have gasoline prices going down below $2 a gallon, the movement is here to find alternative sources of energy, alternative ways of building, and the green movement is on Main Street. It is not just for a group of strident environmentalists to talk about. And that is going to, I think, bode very well for us going into the future. Because it's going to be a problem not just for the U.S., but it'll be a worldwide problem. And I think we will be the center to be able to do that. You know, David Chen has said, he's noticed, he goes, Oregonians are really innovative. He says they're really the first, generally, to do many things. But they tend not to be the leaders of what they do. And so that's what we have to change. We have the opportunity. Don't let it slip by. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Our speaker's not only given us a good presentation, but he's also given us time to ask questions, which is something that a lot of people that come to these Friday forums like. So now we have a nice opportunity. Our first question of our speaker, as always, will be from our Board of Governors host. Our board host today is Don Williams. As many of you know, Don is the immediate past president of City Club. For his day job, he is the chief operating officer of the Schwabe, Williamson & Wyatt law firm. He joined City Club in 1972. He has served on several City Club research study committees, had 2 terms on the research board, and chaired the Friday Forum Committee. And he received the City Club President's Award in 2005. Don?
Thanks, Jim. There's just so many questions one could ask, and since Tom has a great sense of humor, I thought I'd ask him for my question if he'd heard the joke about how many economists it takes to change a light bulb, but I thought Jim would probably kick me off the stage if I did, so I do have a serious question. By the way, the answer to that question is none. If the light bulb needed changing, the market would have already done it. Tom, a headline in the business section of the Seattle Times last week reads, A nation of financial dunderheads needs formal instruction. The article states that Americans are faced with an astounding range of financial choices, and they're having to face both personal and public policy choices that are unprecedented. Now, if the headline's assertion is accurate, and since you're an educator, what specifically can we do to make dunderheads informed citizens?
Well, the answer to the first question about how many economists it takes to change a light bulb, it's not the market anymore, as you all know. It's also the market and the government. What can we do to help people, policymakers, and so on? I could just be very centric here and say, well, you just need to hire more economists and pay them more, and you'd get that information. But I think really what it happens this time around is we were really caught not recognizing that this is going to be such a huge financial crisis. And unfortunately, we had a sort of emergency type policy where let's get something going, we'll figure out later if it's going to work or not. And there, I don't know how you get around that, that particular problem. Because what I think, well, here's the thunderhead movement I think that happened with the Treasury, U.S. Treasury, is that it just galled them that the government had to be involved in the market system. The whole aspect of deregulation and so on is that any involvement in government in the economy is bad. And so now, faced with a position, what do we have to do? We've got to be involved in the economy. So they did it in the least way possible, which is infuse them with money and let them decide how to use it. Well, I'm afraid that when you have the entire industries are scared and not sure where to move, they're just going to hoard that. It's basically a policy we call pushing on a string. It's not doing anything. And what do we do with the Federal Reserve that says, well, we could lower interest rates and that'll help the economy? Well, it's pretty tough to lower below zero. And so they have to be more creative. And this is all sort of new territory. And this is where it makes it very difficult for us, for forecasters, in this new territory, is what's going to be the actual outcome. So I really think for policymakers, we really have to take a view and listen to critics. If you have the pendulum move in one direction, and we have deregulation of all industries, and we have investment banks that were acting like commercial banks, but without the regulation on them, we've seen the abuses that have occurred. I worry that we're still going to have dunderheads, but it's going to be in the opposite direction, where now we're going to have too much re-regulation of industries. Somewhere there's a happy medium there that we have to reach. How we do that, who's going to be charged, we hope the Obama administration will have the foresight for that.
Okay, now's the time when we take questions from the floor. Asking questions at City Club Friday Forum is a privilege of City Club membership, so when you ask your question, please identify yourself as a member. Please keep your question to 30 seconds or less. Please remember it ends in a question mark. And if it doesn't, then I hold this up and then the audience will take care of the problem. So go ahead, please.
Elaine Kogan, the City Club member. Would you comment on the effect of your predictions on the kicker? Some of us think it may be a perverse relationship, but if you can comment on that. And also, do you think that our experience in not collecting the kicker from the corporate sector is something that we might be able to follow this next biennium? Thank you.
Okay, those of you maybe unfamiliar with the kicker, my office does a forecast every 2 years. We do it every quarter, updates, but every 2 years it becomes a little more important than the other ones. And we'll be doing that this May 15th, by the way, for the next biennium. So we do a forecast for what tax revenues will be flowing into the state. Then we see what actually happened over the 2-year biennium period. And after everything is said and done, the taxes are in the door, we measure them. If that comes in 2% or higher than our forecast made over 2 years ago, then everything above the forecast is a cash refund basically to households in the personal income tax kicker and a tax credit to corporates. So, my office takes a very close look at this, and what I mean is that we consciously make sure that the forecast we produce is devoid of thinking about the kicker. What I mean by that is that we don't let the kicker, that law, say, well, should I change the forecast from where I think it is because I'm afraid the kicker may kick. So maybe what I can do is then raise that forecast up a little bit just in case there's stronger growth than we expect, and then there'll be less chances of that kicker happening. Well, then that's gaming the forecast. And I don't think we do anyone justice, the governor, the legislators, if we sugarcoat that forecast because of a bias on our part. And we also don't care where the chips may fall. If we had come up with a forecast and legislators don't like it, we have to just look beyond that and say, well, we're going to take a lot of heat. If we can defend what we did, that's what's important. So with that forecasting and then the kicker, we really try to ignore it. I will say it is just an insane bar to reach. We have to be basically within a 2% margin of error over 2 years. Because also we don't want to forecast too low. Because as you saw back in 2001, we had, 6 special sessions to try to fix the drops in the revenues that were occurring. So a 2% margin of error over 2 years, if I really, really could do that consistently, I'd be sending in my forecast from the Caribbean. Because I'd be really good at doing all sorts of type of forecasting. Really, if we can be within 5%, that is absolutely excellent in terms of statistical forecasting. And was there another part? Oh, the corporate. I'm sorry, I'm rambling on here. The corporate part, we have an advisory group that advises us directly on the revenue forecast. And they're made up of CPAs from companies, made up of financial advisors, generally to fairly wealthy individuals. And they give us a good sense of what's happening on the street relative to the kind of historical and data gathering that we do for our modeling. And basically, they say their clients aren't even aware of a corporate kicker. What I mean by that is that they are concerned about federal taxes, and they will adjust their books and so on to meet those federal taxes. But the Oregon taxes are not really much on their radar. And the fact that they would get a corporate kicker or not, I don't think we would see firms, large corporations leaving Oregon because, if we're not going to get a corporate kicker anymore, which is only a probability to begin with, because it has to be what our forecast is wrong on the upside. So I think just as we used it as a down payment for the Oregon Rainy Day Fund in the last legislative session, I think if it happens again, I think it's a perfect place to put it, is in the Rainy Day Fund 4 times like we're seeing right now.
Gilly Burlingham, a member, and I don't know why economics was called a dreary science because I find it fascinating. In today's Oregonian Metro section, there was an interesting report on what the public thinks about what should be taxed. My particular interest is in the corporate minimum tax. And I just learned that there's a C corporation and S corporation. I won't go to that, but I'm sure you know. But since it was set for $10 in 1931, and if we remember eggs were 10 cents a dozen, if we even raised it just to be proportionate to inflation, what effect would this have on our state income?
Well, the corporate minimum tax, a number of companies do just, for whatever reasons, especially during times like this, when their revenues are falling, they'll most likely be paying that corporate minimum tax. As was pointed out, it was in the 1930s when this tax came about. Back then, that was kind of a high tax, would be $10. And there are proposals that will be talked about in this legislative session about raising that minimum and possibly having a particular staggered amount depending on the size of the business that we're looking at. we know through economic theory, raising taxes does slow down economic activity. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Now, it's by degree. If you go from $10 to $20, I doubt if that would have much of an impact on businesses. So there's a happy sort of sweet point there where you probably could raise it up, because on the other side too, as we're flowing through this economy, to the extent that we cut government services, lay off government workers, that's also decreased economic activity. So in some balance, I think we have to look at this. And it's going to be, I think, a very interesting topic for this next legislative session.
Peter Fenner, a member of City Club. This is a question about my pet peeve, which is studded tires. And do you know how much damage is done by studded tires? And if so, why don't we outlaw them or tax people who are using them?
Well, interestingly enough, my office is cursed, by the way. Besides having to deal with the kicker, we're cursed that way. But we're cursed because of what I described to you before. We try our best to be a unbiased, nonpartisan, we're apolitical office. We don't think we do anybody any justice by playing politics. That's not our job, not our purpose. Because of that, various projects have landed in my lap because we are nonpartisan, not biased. So, for example, just on the side here, my office forecasts the prison inmate population for the adult corrections and for the Oregon Youth Authority, because it was felt that we would give an unbiased view of this. We forecast lottery revenues rather than lottery doing it, because we would give an unbiased view. Well, we are also in charge of the highway cost allocation study. By the way, there weren't new staff, just new projects. And the highway cost allocation study is the one that takes a look at what are the costs that are incurred because of trucks, cars, different weight classes of trucks. What are the costs to the road system, and compare that to what are the revenues that come in from these different classes, that come in because of the weight mile tax, those places on I-5 that they pull off from the registration fees, and then for cars, the tax at the pump. Now, one of the things we do look at is, that's part of the study, is the studded tire situation. Now, off the top of my head, I can't tell you what the cost is, but it is considerable. And there probably will be another look at this, especially given the weather that has happened recently, and every studded tire in town is probably on somebody's car right now. And now that the snow is gone, it's kind of a pain to take them off. You don't have to take them off until, what is it, I think early April. And it does cause damage on the roads. So I think we will revisit that again. I'm not going to give my opinion as to whether I think it should be taxed or not. I will say, though, it does cause a high cost. But I also understand that I believe there is it might be, I believe, an Oregon firm that is experimenting with retractable stud tires and remote controlled by changing the tire pressure so that the studs can come out and they can be retracted. And if that technology works, I think we'll solve a lot of our problems.
Sandra Walden, I'm City Club member and owner of Commercial Solar Ventures, a renewable company that's hopefully helping to make the state a national leader. I want to thank you for your compliment and for your challenge to the people in the room to stand up and lead in renewables. We have an opportunity that we can't miss. One of the reasons we're in a position of leadership is the BETC, the Business Energy Tax Credit. I know there's going to be some challenges to that in the coming legislative session, and I just would like to have you enlighten us a bit about how the BETC has been calculated for impact on the budget for the state.
Okay, the business energy tax credits, the BETCs, I'll have to say the calculations are still being done. it appeared that the original amounts that they thought would impact by doing these tax credits, the impacts are tending to be a lot larger in terms of tax credits than what was originally thought. I can tell you that I believe they'll still keep occurring. I don't think this legislative session will decrease them in any degree. They have been useful, especially in the wind power generation area. And when the law was changed to allow pass-through so that industries, companies I should say, like Intel, can buy a energy credit that, say, even a public school might use, where they wouldn't get any tax credit, advantage from it, but they could sell that tax credit to somebody that could use it. So those have been very good in terms of, I think, spreading around the ability to have these energy efficient aspects occur through more both public and private areas that might not have been as widespread if we didn't have that pass-through. But it has raised up quite considerably the cost of those tax credits. So I don't think there's going to be possibly a major move on that this legislative session in terms of either direction, either further expanding them or decreasing them. But it is something that will be looked at, unfortunately, because of how deep this recession and how our state tax revenues may be impacted and need some help.
Chris Smith, City Club member. Tom, you spoke about the impact of variable energy prices on our leadership status as a green center, but of course, energy supply and pricing uncertainty aren't the only reason to get green. Climate change is another one. Here in Oregon, climate change is probably not going to look like the Willamette Valley turning into a desert, but instead it's going to look like more variable climate. Freak snowstorms, flooding that shuts down freeways, events that affect our economy. Has your office begun to look at how variable climate will affect the economy in Oregon?
I have to tell you, truthfully, we've not. It's not been explicitly put into our forecasts. Our forecasts go out basically 5 years. But that is something that we will be undertaking. My counterparts in the state of Washington are starting to look at that. And so we hope to work with them because we think it's more of a Pacific Northwest aspect that we want to look at as we're going forward. But you're definitely right. That is something that we do need to start looking at.
Kurt Wavering, member. The recession that we're in, both U.S. and worldwide, has come about because of a series of policies, briefly unbridled capitalism and deregulation and such. And I'm just wondering if you are sensing that there is a discussion among economists and political leaders that look to other models, such as Denmark, Norway, Sweden, the Netherlands, about the purposes of government and how they use economics to meet social objectives and minimize the appalling devastation that occurs when people lose their house and their jobs and so forth.
Yes, Kurt. Yes, that is quite a discussion. In fact, it's a very healthy discussion. I don't know if you probably don't know about the science of economics and the academic journals that are out there. But one economist kind of described the activity that economists do in terms of their research is that they undertake interesting questions like, what is the optimal arrangement of the deck chairs on board the Titanic? And that's the kind of questions economists had been debating in the literatures. And now this has brought it back around to where maybe, everyday life here and what's happening to societies and how economics fits into that should start to come back more into the research realm and be accepted as strong research topics for economists. And so, yes, that is being discussed. But what I will tell you is that in my own position, I still think capitalism is the best system going. But we have to recognize that it's not something that was handed down from the heavens. It is I'll call it man-made institution. And likewise, it has faults to it. It is not perfect. And so the government's role is to have the level playing field so that the rules of the game are played properly. And I think what we saw recently is that that role by government was slipping away. So I think we can still have government come back to play a proper role, but to what extent it gets closer to the models that you were mentioning, a Denmark or a Sweden, is possible. But likewise, I think there are, of the models that are available where government is a player, is sort of the capitalist government sort of relationship where both try to help each other.
Tom Nielsen, City Club member. What seems like is different this round of economic transitions is the globalness of it, and that it's really worldwide. And how affected is Oregon, certainly the US, by our inability to impact what's happening in China and other places that are also going through a similar process?
Yes, you know, Oregon, we always use a rule of thumb in the office. If we don't have Oregon-specific data, but we have a corresponding data that we'd like to have, but it's with US-wide, Oregon tends to be about 1 to 1.2 to 1.3% of the US economy in almost all sorts of measures, whether it be population, incomes. Like, for example, I would really love us to have a sales tax. Not political reasons, or any other reason, just because I'd love to have the data. You know? To be able to tell what we're spending here. But without that, you know, we have to kind of guess based on US figures or what's happening in Washington, for example, that has great data on those areas, to try to figure out what's going on here. So we don't have that great ability to influence things, but what we have done over time is that we've positioned ourselves, I think, very nicely in international trade. You know, 20 years ago, China was not even in the top 20 of the trading partners with Oregon. Today, it's jumping between the number 2 spot and the number 1 spot, generally with Canada. And I believe once this trouble is through, China will also still be quite the force in the world in terms of growing economies. And I think we're very well positioned to keep that trade going with them, and that's going to help out our industries.
Steve Novick, City Club member. Tom, I have 2 questions. One is, do you think anybody has ever tried to spike your drink before you issue a forecast in order to affect what it says? You know, quaaludes for down, uppers for up. And second, we hear a lot of talk about the forthcoming green economy, but rarely, I think, do people talk about nuts and bolts. How many new green jobs might there be in manufacturing and services? What might they pay? And if you have your own thoughts about what we might realistically expect in Oregon in that sense, that'd be great to hear it.
Okay. I don't take speed or Prozac, so I'm okay there. And actually, I drink caffeine coffee, so that doesn't even affect me. What we're looking at, what you're saying about in terms of the green economy, for policymakers to work in conducting and crafting policy that would be related to green areas, they really do need the data associated with it. I mean, if we're going to give a tax credit or break to groups, what does this mean in terms of jobs? What does this mean in terms of industries? We've got to have better measures. So, Steve, what I would say is I'll just point you to the November issue of the Economic Development Quarterly. Jennifer Allen and myself have an article published there, and we attempt to get a view of what this means for the Portland metro area in terms of trying to measure what industries, what amount of workers and so on are involved in the green industries. And we've got comparisons these days of somewhere between 3 to 7%. In some industries, it's well over 50% are involved in that. But an overall aspect is that and this is with slightly older data, we're rapidly approaching 10% of workforce is, in a sense, more directly related, not just indirectly, but directly related to green movements. So I think there's more work that needs to be done in that area. And it has to be done because if policymakers are going to make movements in this area, they need to have that information to be able to do so.
David Margulis, City Club member. I have a simple question. I'd like your thoughts. The banks have been given billions of dollars from the federal government. Is there not a way to restrict a channel where the money is only reserved to be given as loans so money would flow out instead of being used for other purposes like acquisitions? Are there any models or thoughts on how they could track and direct this money?
You know, I think we're going to probably see a little bit more in what I was saying earlier, where we were doing this emergency policy and just let's just throw the money out there and we'll figure out later whether it's going to do any good or not. We're going to see more measures that are going to be tied to these packages, where we're going to say, you know, if we infuse this money, you can put this much aside for your capital base so that your books look a little better, instead of putting it all there so your books look great and not doing anything with it. And a certain percentage has to be loaned out. And so I definitely think we're going to be seeing that coming forward.
John Leeper, City Club member. I am concerned about the long-term viability of our just multi-billion-dollar indebtedness and the sale of bonds, and I just say to myself, when or is the rest of the world going to get tired of supporting us? And I just wonder what your thoughts are on that matter, because it's a matter of concern to me when they talk about now not billions but trillions of dollars of indebtedness.
Yes, we are rapidly, you know, it was as recently as towards the end of the Clinton administration, we were running a surplus in the federal budget. And now that has rapidly changed, where we most likely will be over $1 trillion in deficit for the U.S. budget this year, and probably another $1 trillion in deficit in 2010. Now remember, there's a difference between outstanding debt, which is the amount that we owe over time that grows, and the deficit, which is a flow. That's the budget period. What were revenues coming in, what were expenditures going out. And that's the $1 trillion. So that's $1 trillion on top of our outstanding debt. Now, we at this point are really not in that bad a shape relative to the size of our overall economic activity. We're starting to approach up, some measures are sort of, the outstanding debt's getting up to about 6% of total GDP. That's not too bad at the moment. I'm sorry, our deficit is getting up to about 6% of our GDP. We were at that position in the 1980s under Reagan. And we were in a worse situation because we also were coming off of double-digit inflation rates. So the interest on that deficit that was adding to our outstanding debt was going up quite dramatically. In fact, that was one of our largest payments out of the government, was just interest on the outstanding debt. So we're a little better positioned today. We do not have as high inflation. The interest rates are relatively low. But if that continues to happen and continues to grow, yes, at some point it does become dangerous. Because then it becomes, if you can imagine this, they may question the U.S. government's ability to repay this. And how do you have to repay it? You have two choices. You can raise taxes or you can print up the money. Neither one is a very good position. So I do worry about it, but at the same time, you want to keep in mind, the Federal Reserve, for example, that has put all this money out, they also have mechanisms to soak it back in. And so I think as we get into 2010, you're going to see interest rates starting to rise again as the Federal Reserve tries to soak this stuff back in to try to stave off a possible inflationary situation. Given that we're saying deflation today, well, heck, 6 months ago we were worried about inflation. I think we could easily say we could worry about inflation in a year and a half from now.
I'm sorry, we're out of time, so we'll have to stop for this week. Please join us next week at our Friday Forum for a panel discussion on different approaches around the world to addressing government budgeting and spending in these difficult economic times. Remember, the book is for sale in the back of the room. I'm getting prompted. And as we close, please help me thank again Tom Potiowsky for a great presentation. We're adjourned.